In the shadowy cloisters of medieval Europe, where incense curled into ancient stone and chants echoed against stained glass, lived women thought to be the purest of all, the nuns. For centuries they were cloaked in an aura of sanctity, brides of Christ, untouched by the grime of the outside world, tucked safely behind abbey walls. But that is not the full story. Behind convent gates, far from the watchful eyes of parishioners and papal messengers, life for many nuns was far more earthly. Some gambled, some ran profitable scams, some took lovers. A few even dabbled in murder. Their habits, it turns out, were not always so habitual.
Let us begin with the Abbey of St. Catherine, nestled in the soft hills of southern France. The records say it was a place of prayer, silence, and self-denial. But if you asked the townsfolk of Montpellier, they'd tell you about Sister Renée the Red. She earned her nickname not for her hair, but for the crimson dice she rolled in the abbey's secret gambling den. According to a letter smuggled from a disgruntled priest to the Bishop of Narbonne in 1332, Sister Renée hosted late-night gatherings where the nuns bet not just coins, but relics, trinkets from pilgrims, and occasionally favors of a more physical kind. One novice who lost a game of hazard was allegedly forced to clean the chamber pots of all 27 sisters for a month, naked. The abbess, far from condemning these games, was known to referee them. After all, the winnings helped pay for rare spiced wine and fur-lined boots, quite the luxury in an age where most peasants froze in rags. She had not come to the convent by choice. Few did. She was the daughter of a disgraced baron, a girl too clever and too defiant to be married off quietly. At 16, after slapping the local magistrate's son for grabbing her thigh at a banquet, she was deposited at the abbey with a small dowry and the warning, "Learn silence, or die with your pride." She learned neither. Instead, she watched, listened, waited. Renée saw how bored the sisters were, how some hoarded sweetmeats under their mattresses or slipped love letters into hymnals. She saw how the abbess, rotund and secretly fond of honey wine, turned a blind eye to distractions, so long as the tithes kept flowing and the facade stayed uncracked. So Renée built a little empire in the shadows. It began with games. A few sisters came down to the old storeroom for warmth in the winter. She taught them to play dice, hazard, passage, bones. At first, they gambled with toothpicks and lentils, then with rosary beads, then trinkets. One sister bet her ivory-handled comb, another a pair of silver-rimmed spectacles stolen from the sacristan's desk. The abbess, far from scolding her, joined the fourth time she was invited. She bet her garnet brooch and won back triple, laughing like a girl at market. From then on, the chamber beneath the vestry was no longer a secret. It was a sanctuary of a different kind. She ran it like a tavern, except holier on the surface and far more dangerous underneath. But sin never sleeps quietly. One evening, a novice named Beatrice, freshly arrived from Avignon and still soaked in piety, stumbled upon the dice game while fetching firewood. She gasped. She dropped the logs. She backed away, horrified. Renée caught her by the wrist before she could flee. She asked,
See something holy, little dove?" Her voice sweet as poisoned honey. Beatrice threatened to tell. Renee smiled, offered her a seat and a plum. The girl refused. 2 days later, she was gone. The official record said Beatrice fled in the night, a wild impulse. The gate was left ajar. A search was conducted. But Renee's hands bore strange scratches for days after, and the abbess wore a ring that had once belonged to the novice's mother. No one ever found Beatrice. As years passed, Renee's reputation grew, whispered among the local nobility. Pilgrims came to the abbey not for relics, but for the chance to sip spiced wine from nuns' hands and lose silver coins to a woman in a habit who played dice like the devil's daughter. She was called the Red, the cardinal's vice, the abbess of sin, depending on who was speaking and how drunk they were. Church investigators came once. They found nothing, or rather, they left with full purses and bottles of St. Catherine's cherry cordial. Sister Renee died in her late 40s, sharp-eyed and smirking to the end. Some say she choked on a candied fig. Others say she was poisoned by a jealous nun. Still others claim she faked her death, shaved her head, and escaped dressed as a friar, headed for Marseille and freer sin. What is certain is this. After her death, the gambling room was bricked up. The red dice were never found. And for decades afterwards, sisters swore they could hear the echo of laughter beneath the vestry floorboards. Laughter and the soft clack of dice on wood.
While many took vows of chastity, celibacy was far from universally observed. In fact, the church received so many complaints of nuns bearing children that by the 13th century, certain orders simply moved pregnant sisters to separate convents, out of sight, out of scandal. One infamous example comes from the English priory of Wotton, chronicled in the Miracles of the Virgin Mary. Here is her story. They said she was blessed when she was 5. Her father brought her to the gates of Wotton Priory with polished boots and cold eyes. He kissed her once on the forehead, handed her to the church, and walked away. From that moment on, her name belonged to God, her future shaped by stone walls, wax candles, and strict silence. She didn't understand what had been taken from her. The nuns fed her, clothed her, taught her Latin and obedience. She learned to kneel for hours in prayer until her knees hardened, to scrub floors until her fingers bled, to smile and lower her gaze when corrected. The abbess called her a child of Mary. Others simply called her quiet. But she was not devout, not in the way they expected. Something inside her resisted, a little wild, a little sad. As she came of age, her questions grew alongside her body. Why did the Virgin smile from the painted walls while the sisters wept in corners? Why did she feel heat rise to her skin when the lay brothers passed in the courtyard? One of them noticed. His name was Thomas, a lay brother, just a laborer really, with dirt under his nails and laughter in his voice. He wasn't allowed to speak to the sisters, but once, while dropping a bucket by the chapel wall, he cursed under his breath. She laughed. That moment cracked something open. At first, they stole glances, then words, then moments in the orchard when the sun had already gone. She remembered the feel of his hand, rough, real, the first real touch she had known in years. She gave him body and secret. Both, she would learn, were dangerous gifts. Their meetings began in secret. behind the orchard trees, in the quiet of twilight. Thomas spoke to her like she was real, not sacred. He touched her like she was a woman, not a prayer. In him, she found something the convent had never offered: warmth. Their affair bloomed quickly and dangerously. She gave herself to him completely. And with that gift came consequence. Her belly began to swell. The other sisters noticed. The whispers grew like vines. Then one morning, they came for her. Rough hands dragging her from her bed, words like blades thrown at her head. Whore, beast, defiler. They didn't summon a priest. They didn't ask for confession. They simply locked her in the cold root cellar beneath the priory, alone, shivering, sick. Straw for a bed, iron for company. And then they took Thomas. She didn't see what happened to him, but she heard the screams. She saw the red light of fire flickering through the cracks in the wooden floor above her head. Later, a novice, her hands shaking, told her in hushed horror, "They burned what made him a man," she said. "They cut him, burned the rest." She didn't cry for God. She didn't dare. She wasted in the dark. Her skin turned pale. The child inside her moved, then did not. One night, as she lay dying in spirit if not in body, she whispered a name she had not spoken in weeks. Mary. Not as a prayer, as a final attempt. And then a strange stillness. In the morning, the chains were removed. Her body emptied. Her belly flat. No child, no blood. The sisters were stunned. Some knelt, others wept. "A miracle," the abbess said. "The Virgin has forgiven her." They bathed her, dressed her, restored her to the community as though nothing had happened. She said the right words, she nodded at the right times, but something inside her never returned from that cellar. Years passed. She became known as Sister Justina. She taught children psalms and catechism, smiled gently as they learned to kneel. To them, she was serene, quiet, wise. But sometimes, when the sun bled through the stained glass windows, she felt her daughter, the one she never held, pressing against her memory. Sometimes she heard Thomas's laugh in the wind. Sometimes she remembered the cellar's chill and the silence that followed a scream. And she wondered, in the deepest corners of her soul, whether the Virgin had saved her or simply helped the others forget.
While rare, violence did occur behind convent walls, especially when power and property were at stake. In 1421, Abbess Matilda of the St. Elmo convent in the Rhineland was poisoned by her own sub-prioress. The motive? A dispute over control of a vineyard donated by a wealthy noble. Even darker was the case of Sister Agnes of Lübeck, whose confession before her execution detailed the slow poisoning of 3 other nuns who mocked her Latin and withheld honey bread. Her writings suggest she believed herself possessed by a divine spirit, commanding her to purge the unworthy. Despite this, she was defended at her trial by several of her sisters, who claimed the victims were cruel and politically manipulative. Whether Agnes was a lunatic or merely a product of internal convent power games remains debated by historians. Another case is that of Sister Virginia Maria de Leyva. In 1608, in the quiet Italian town of Monza, near Milan, the convent of Santa Margherita held a dark secret behind its stone walls. It was here that Sister Virginia Maria de Leyva, better known to history as the Nun of Monza, would be forever remembered not for her devotion, but for a murder that shocked even the jaded courts of the Inquisition. Sister Virginia wasn't just any nun. She was noble-born, daughter of a powerful Spanish governor, forced into the convent at 13. Intelligent, headstrong, and never meant for cloistered life, she quickly rose in influence and eventually became Mother Superior. But the veil didn't smother her fire, it merely hid it. In her 20s, she began a scandalous affair with a local aristocrat named Giovanni Paolo Osio. Using secret passages and bribed servants, the two carried on a torrid relationship for years. But with passion came paranoia. When one of the novices, Sister Catarina, discovered the affair and threatened to expose them, Virginia and Osio conspired to silence her. And so, late one night, within the convent walls, Sister Catarina was strangled with a cord in her cell, a death disguised as illness, buried quietly in the convent cemetery. It might have worked, but people talk. Servants whispered, novices cried, and a few brave sisters eventually told the archbishop. An investigation followed, uncovering letters, witnesses, and damning details. Virginia was arrested and interrogated by the Holy Office, the Inquisition, where under pressure she confessed to the murder, the affair, and to covering up other crimes Osio had committed, including additional killings.
Holy hustles, fraud, forgery, and fake relics. Some convents became enterprises unto themselves. In an era where relics could draw pilgrims and their gold, certain nuns took to forging them. The monastery of St. Lucia in Bohemia was found to have sold a thumb of St. John that, upon inspection by a suspicious bishop, was revealed to be a monkey's paw dipped in wax. Others sold fake indulgences or offered miraculous cures involving oils and ointments supposedly blessed by saints, but actually made with herbs and goose fat. Records even describe sisters forging wills for elderly patrons, ensuring their land miraculously ended up in convent hands.
Rome, 1859. Behind sacred walls, a holy war brewed. Princess Katharina von Hohenzollern had come to Rome seeking silence. The palaces of Vienna were loud with whispers, and her heart, still bruised from scandal and politics, longed for the purity of a convent's cloistered peace. The convent of Sant'Ambrogio, nestled in the heart of the Eternal City, welcomed her with candlelight and sweet incense. The air was heavy with piety, and the sisters smiled with practiced serenity. But soon Katharina noticed strangeness. The young nuns doted on the abbess, Sister Maria Luisa, with the trembling fervor of fanatics. They called her the beloved of the Virgin, whispered that she could speak to angels, that her touch cured fevers. The abbess, youthful and magnetic, had eyes too knowing for a cloistered bride of Christ. Katharina, educated and unyielding, watched carefully. She saw how Maria Luisa slipped notes to visiting priests, how she held a gold ring hidden in her robes, said to have been given by Christ in a mystic marriage, how young novices disappeared into her chambers and emerged pale, teary, but devout. And one night, Katharina overheard the truth. A whispered conversation in the sacristy. The abbess claimed to be a mystic, yes, but also the secret bride of Christ. And her visions? Excuses to justify her desires. Her relationship with Father Lezioli, her sexual coercion of novices, and worst, her orders to poison those who opposed her. They had tried it once already.
Katerina had fallen mysteriously ill 2 weeks after questioning a strange relic Maria Luisa had kissed. She recovered, but another nun, Sister Lucretia, did not. Her tea had tasted like almonds. Her prayers had ended in convulsions. Katerina wrote to her cousin, a cardinal, the letter left under the guise of confession. Vatican officials arrived days later, quietly, with rings on fingers and swords under cloaks. They found arsenic hidden in the infirmary. They found letters from priests half burned in the stove, and they found a convent ruled not by Christ, but by manipulation, lust, and poison. Maria Luisa was arrested, the priest was disgraced, and the Vatican buried the rest in silence. But Katerina left Sant'Ambrogio changed. The church had not given her peace, only a mask. Behind the veil of purity, she had glimpsed rot, and it grinned like a saint.
A cloistered carnival of contradictions. It's important not to paint all medieval nuns with the same sinful brush. Many were indeed devout, literate women who served their communities, healed the sick, and preserved culture during dark centuries. But to ignore the contradictions, the gambling, the sex, the fraud, the fury, would be to accept a fantasy instead of history. The convent was not a vacuum. It was a community of women, brilliant, bored, pious, political, lonely, curious, and sometimes wicked. It was a mirror of the world outside, just with higher walls and better Latin. So the next time you picture a medieval nun, don't just imagine a pale woman at prayer. Picture dice clacking on a chapel floor. Picture forbidden lovers slipping in through candlelit cloisters. Picture whispered deals, sudden screams, and the silence that follows when sins are sealed behind stone. Because not all habits are holy,